She unplugged my ventilator and called it a lesson in gratitude. 30 seconds without air, and she smiled. How does a sister reach the point where watching you suffocate feels like justice? My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 35 years old, a financial manager at a private investment firm in Chicago. I own my apartment. I pay my taxes. I built my life carefully, responsibly, independently. If you met me at work, you'd probably describe me as composed, practical, not the kind of woman who ends up telling a story like this. But 3 weeks ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, paralyzed and unable to speak, and my sister tried to stop my breathing with her bare hands. And the worst part, it wasn't the first time she'd tried to erase me. The night it happened, the room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of the ventilator. A soft mechanical sigh, in and out, in and out. The machine breathed for me because my spine couldn't yet send the right signals to my lungs. Temporary spinal trauma, the doctor said. I had been in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and turned my sedan into twisted metal. They told me I was lucky to be alive. Lucky. I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't turn my head. I couldn't form words. My mind was clear, sharp even, but my body felt like a locked room I couldn't escape. That evening, Melissa came alone. She didn't rush in with panic or tears. She walked calmly, like she was arriving for a routine visit. My younger sister has always had that kind of composure, the ability to enter a room and make it feel like she belongs at the center of it. She stood beside my bed and looked down at me, not with cruelty, not with rage, with disappointment. You know what your problem is, Danielle, she said softly, leaning close enough that I could feel her breath against my ear. You've never learned to be grateful. Grateful? For what? For surviving? For staying quiet? For being the sister who steps aside? Her fingers reached for the ventilator tube. At first, I thought she was adjusting it, helping. That's what she would say later. But then she disconnected it. The sound stopped. Silence flooded the room. And suddenly, so did terror. When you're on a ventilator, you don't realize how dependent you are on that mechanical rhythm until it's gone. My lungs didn't know what to do. They felt heavy, confused. I tried to inhale, but nothing came. My chest burned. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, triggering alarms on the monitor beside me. The machine screamed. I couldn't. I stared at her. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to beg. Instead, I watched her expression. She didn't look frantic. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't even angry. She was calm, as if she were proving a point. 30 seconds can feel like an eternity when you're suffocating. Each second stretches, thick and endless. My vision blurred at the edges. My body thrashed internally, even if it couldn't move externally. And through that haze, I saw her smile, satisfied, like a teacher watching a student finally understand a difficult lesson. Then she reattached the tube. Air rushed back into me in a mechanical gasp. The ventilator resumed its rhythm. The alarms quieted. My lungs filled painfully, desperately. She patted my hand. There, she whispered. See? You're fine. And she walked out humming. I lay there long after she left, my heart racing, my mind spiraling. Was it a mistake? Was I imagining the intent? No. I work in finance. I deal in evidence, patterns, risk assessment. That wasn't an accident. That was control. If you're wondering whether I told someone I tried, the next morning, when my parents visited together, I focused everything I had on blinking deliberately, rapidly, when Melissa entered the room again. I tried to force my heart rate up when she touched the equipment. I prayed someone would notice. Eventually, when I regained just enough control over my throat to whisper broken words, I told my mother. Melissa unplugged it. My mother sighed. She was just checking the connection, she said. Stop being dramatic. She's worried about you. Dramatic. That word has followed me my entire life. In the Carter household, there was one unspoken rule. Melissa came first. She was born with a congenital heart defect. At 5 years old, she nearly died during surgery. The entire family revolved around her recovery. From that moment forward, she was the miracle, the fragile one, the center of gravity. Everything she wanted, she received. Every mistake she made, someone explained away. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, was celebrated like a national holiday. And me? I was the stable one, the reliable one, the daughter who didn't need extra attention. Danielle, you're so strong. Danielle, be patient. Danielle, your sister almost died. I learned to shrink. I learned to give up the bigger bedroom. I learned to cook dinner when my mother was exhausted from worrying about Melissa. I learned that being good meant being quiet. For years, I thought my mother simply loved her more. Now I understand something darker. She needed one daughter to shine and one to serve. And I had been cast in my role early. But lying in that hospital bed, unable to move, something shifted inside me. Because this time, I wasn't just being overlooked, I was being erased. Melissa's whisper echoed in my mind. You've never learned to be grateful. Grateful for what? For surviving her? For being invisible enough that no one questioned her? I replayed the moment over and over, her hand on the tube, the deliberate pause before she pulled it free. This wasn't about my accident. It wasn't even about anger. It was about something deeper, something that had been building quietly for years. And though I didn't know it yet, the ventilator wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the continuation of one that started 18 years earlier, at the top of a staircase, with another pair of hands on my back. Back then, they told me I fell. This time, I knew better. And as I lay there, listening to the steady mechanical breath of the machine keeping me alive, I made a decision I had never made before in my life. I would not disappear. Not quietly. Not conveniently. Not for her. If my sister thought 30 seconds without air would teach me gratitude, she was wrong. It taught me something else entirely. It taught me that survival is not the same as silence. And this time, I was going to make sure someone listened. If you only saw what happened in that hospital room, you might think it began there with a ventilator, a whispered insult, and 30 seconds without air. But stories like this never begin at the moment of violence. They begin much earlier, in smaller ways, in the quiet shaping of roles, in who gets protected and who gets prepared to endure. Growing up in the Carter household meant understanding something without ever hearing it spoken aloud. Melissa came first. Always. When she was 5 years old, she nearly died during heart surgery. I still remember the waiting room, the way my mother's hands trembled, the way my father stared at the floor as if he could will himself not to feel. I was 7, old enough to understand fear, not old enough to understand what that fear would cost me later. Melissa survived. The doctors called it remarkable, a miracle, even. And from that moment on, she was treated like one. Everything in our house began orbiting around her. Her medication schedule determined dinner times. Her energy levels determined family outings. Her moods determined whether the evening would be calm or tense. When she cried, the world stopped. When she laughed, everyone exhaled. I learned quickly how to adjust. Danielle, you're the strong one, my mother would say when I tried to show her a drawing I'd made. Let your sister rest right now. Danielle, be understanding. Melissa's been through so much. Danielle, you don't want to stress her out, do you? I don't think anyone meant to make me invisible. That's the complicated part. It didn't feel cruel in the beginning. It felt reasonable, compassionate, even. Of course, the child who almost died needed more attention. Of course, I could handle myself, and I did. I handled myself so well that eventually, no one thought to ask how I was doing at all. Birthdays became quieter for me, louder for her. If she had a good checkup, we celebrated with cake and balloons. If I brought home straight A's, my report card was praised briefly before the conversation shifted back to Melissa's latest cardiology appointment. At school, teachers described me as mature. At home, that translated to useful. I set the table. I washed the dishes. I made sure Melissa took her pills when my parents were too tired to remember. When she had nightmares about hospitals, I slept on the floor beside her bed. I was the backup system, the contingency plan, the daughter who didn't need, and Melissa learned something alongside me. She learned that the world would bend for her. She learned that fear could be currency. She learned that if she looked fragile enough, everyone would rush to protect her. At first, I don't think she did it consciously. She was a child, a scared one. But as we grew older and her health stabilized, the dynamic didn't change. The emergency had ended, but the hierarchy remained. By the time we were teenagers, her heart condition was managed. She could run, she could travel, she could live almost normally. But in our house, she was still made of glass. If we argued, I was told to apologize. If she broke something, it was an accident. If I broke something, I was careless. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. 1,000 small moments that added up to a pattern. And patterns are hard to see when you're living inside them. I used to think my mother simply loved Melissa more. That's the narrative I carried for years because it was easier than questioning something deeper. It was easier to believe in uneven affection than intentional design. But looking back now, I see it differently. My mother needed Melissa to be extraordinary. The miracle child, the survivor, the proof that she had endured something catastrophic and come out stronger. It gave her identity, sympathy, a story to tell at church gatherings and neighborhood dinners. And for that story to work, there had to be contrast. There had to be the other daughter steady, self-sufficient, unremarkable in her resilience. Me. I became the dependable one, the reliable one, the daughter who wouldn't fall apart, the daughter who could be overlooked. Sometimes I wonder if Melissa felt it too, that unspoken competition. Because despite being adored, she watched me move through the world with a kind of independence she didn't have. I didn't need accommodations. I didn't need people hovering. I could walk into a room and stand on my own. That kind of stability can look like indifference to someone raised on attention. By high school, our roles had hardened. She had friends who revolved around her drama, her stories, her intensity. I kept my circle small. I focused on grades, on scholarships, on building a future that didn't depend on anyone's approval. When I got into a strong business program out of state, my parents were proud but anxious. "Will Melissa be okay without you?" my mother asked me privately, as if my acceptance letter was something I had done to my sister. I remember standing there, suitcase half packed, feeling a strange guilt for wanting my own life. Melissa hugged me before I left. She cried. But even then, something in her eyes felt sharp, calculating in a way I couldn't quite name. "You'll come back," she said. "You always do." And I did. For holidays, for birthdays, for hospital checkups. Even when she no longer needed supervision, I returned because that's what I had been trained to do, orbit her. I built my career carefully, finance suited me, numbers made sense, effort produced results, risk could be measured. Unlike family dynamics, which shift quietly and deny their own gravity, by 35 I had everything I thought mattered: stability, savings, an apartment in my name, a job that respected me. What I didn't realize was that, to Melissa, my independence wasn't admirable. It was threatening, because while she had always been the center of our parents' emotional world, I had quietly become the more secure one in every other way. And in a family structured the way ours was, security can feel like betrayal. I didn't see the resentment forming. I didn't see the way her smile tightened when conversations drifted toward my promotion. I didn't question why she began asking casual questions about our grandmother's estate after the funeral questions about equal shares and future plans. I assumed equality meant peace. I was wrong. The truth is, invisibility doesn't protect you. It just delays the moment someone decides you're inconvenient. And by the time I understood that, I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to move, realizing that the roles we learned as children don't disappear when we grow up. They evolve. Melissa had spent her life being protected. I had spent mine adapting. But when protection turns into entitlement and adaptation turns into silence, the imbalance doesn't correct itself. It escalates. Looking back now, I can see how every small moment, every apology I gave to keep the peace, every time I stepped aside so she could shine, built towards something inevitable. Because when someone grows up believing they are the miracle, they may struggle to accept that the other child survived too. And in our house, survival was never meant to belong to both of us. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of ordinary weekday that doesn't warn you it's about to divide your life into before and after. I had stayed late at the office, finishing quarterly reports. Numbers, projections, risk assessments, the quiet comfort of logic. I remember feeling tired but satisfied, thinking about the leftovers waiting in my refrigerator and the silence of my apartment. I never saw the other car coming. Later, they told me he ran a red light going nearly 50 miles an hour. Drunk. No prior record. Just one bad decision that rearranged everything. What I remember is the flash of headlights from the left, impossibly bright, the violent crunch of metal collapsing inward, the sound of glass exploding like 1,000 tiny bells, then weightlessness, then nothing. When I woke up, the world was white and humming. Hospital lights, antiseptic air, a dull, distant ache that didn't quite feel like pain yet because my body wasn't fully responding. I tried to lift my hand. It didn't move. I tried to swallow. My throat felt thick, uncooperative. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. Panic is a strange thing when you can't express it. It has nowhere to go. It ricochets inside your chest, amplifying itself. A doctor leaned into my line of sight and spoke slowly, carefully, as if I were underwater. "Danielle, you were in a serious accident. You have temporary spinal trauma. We expect recovery, but right now your body needs time." Temporary. 5 to 7 days, they said. I clung to that number like a contract. 5 to 7 days of stillness, of waiting, of depending on machines. They inserted the ventilator because my breathing was shallow and inconsistent. Not completely gone, just unreliable. My body needed help while the swelling around my spine decreased. "You're lucky," the nurses repeated. "Lucky to be alive. Lucky not to have permanent paralysis. Lucky." I stared at the ceiling and tried to feel grateful. But gratitude is difficult when you can't scratch your own nose. My parents arrived within hours. I heard my mother before I saw her, the clipped urgency in her voice, the controlled hysteria that always surfaced during crises. My father followed, quieter, heavier in his movements. They stood on either side of the bed like bookends. "Oh, Danielle," my mother whispered, brushing my hair back. "You scared us." I wanted to ask if Melissa was there. Instead, I lay motionless, blinking. Melissa came later that evening. She stood near the doorway at first, watching me. I couldn't read her expression clearly from that angle, but I sensed calculation rather than shock. "You look peaceful," she said eventually, stepping closer. Peaceful? I was trapped inside my own body. Over the next 24 hours, I began to understand the full extent of my vulnerability. I couldn't turn my head without assistance. I couldn't hold a pen. I couldn't form more than the faintest whisper, and even that felt like dragging sound through broken glass. But I could hear, and that became my only weapon. Hospital walls are thin. Doors are rarely fully closed. People assume the immobile cannot comprehend. They are wrong. The second night, I heard my mother in the hallway, speaking in a low, urgent tone. "This is it," she said. There was a pause. I couldn't hear the other voice, but I could guess. "She can't object to anything right now. Get the documents ready." Silence stretched. "We need her signature before she recovers." My heart began to pound so violently the monitor beeped in protest. "Documents? Signature? Object to what?" I lay there, mind racing through possibilities. Insurance forms? Medical consent? Power of attorney? Then Melissa entered alone. The lights were dimmed. The hallway outside was quiet. She pulled a chair close to my bed and leaned in so only I could hear her. "You know what's funny?" she whispered. "We've been waiting for something like this." "Waiting? For what?" I wanted to scream. She smiled faintly. "You're finally useful to us." The words slid under my skin like ice. Useful. I had spent my entire childhood being useful. Setting tables, mediating arguments, sacrificing small things so she wouldn't have to. But this was different. This wasn't emotional convenience. This was strategic. I lay in the darkness long after she left, replaying the hallway conversation. Signature, documents, before she recovers. And then it clicked. 2 years earlier, our grandmother had passed away and left her house to both of us equally. A detail that had caused more tension than anyone admitted. Melissa had smiled politely at the reading of the will, but her jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. Equal. The word must have tasted bitter. Over the past year, she had asked subtle questions, casual ones. What were my plans for my share? Would I consider selling? Was I attached to the property emotionally? I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Equal inheritance felt fair, uncomplicated, but lying in that hospital bed, I realized how convenient my silence had become. If I couldn't speak, I couldn't object. If I couldn't move, I couldn't review paperwork. If someone placed a pen between my fingers and guided my hand, the monitor spiked again. The next morning, I listened more carefully. My mother's voice floated in from the hallway. "Yes, I have her old signature from the birthday card she sent last year," she said. "The notary says it's good enough. Just make sure the date shows she signed before the accident." My stomach dropped. Forgery. They weren't asking for consent. They were manufacturing it. 5 days, she continued. "We just need 5 more days. 5 to 7 days. The same window the doctors had given for my recovery. I had never felt so powerless in my life. Not when I gave up my room for Melissa during one of her fragile phases. Not when I swallowed frustration after being called dramatic. This was different. This was criminal. My father's voice murmured something I couldn't catch. But I heard no objection, no shock, no moral line being drawn. Silence can be just as loud as agreement. I began to understand something that chilled me more than the ventilator ever could. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. Melissa's debt had been growing. I knew that much. She had borrowed money for a man who promised to leave his wife. When he vanished, so did the illusion of her control. And now I was paralyzed. The timing felt less like coincidence and more like opportunity. That night, when she unplugged the ventilator for the first time, I realized something terrifying. The documents weren't the only thing standing in her way. I was. And if 5 days felt too long to wait for my silence, she was willing to shorten the timeline. As I lay there, forced to breathe through a machine that had already proven how fragile my survival was, I made a decision. They thought I was helpless. They thought immobility meant ignorance. They believed I couldn't fight back. But they underestimated the one skill I had perfected since childhood: observation. I couldn't move. I couldn't shout. But I could watch, and I could remember. And if I survived this, not just the accident, but them, I would make sure every whispered word in that hallway mattered. Because the accident might have put me in that bed. But what my family was planning, that was deliberate. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the quiet one. Once you realize the people standing at your bedside are not there to protect you, every sound changes meaning. The soft shuffle of shoes in the hallway becomes strategy. The murmur of voices behind a half-closed door becomes conspiracy. Even the steady rhythm of a ventilator feels fragile, something that can be taken away with a single hand. After I overheard my mother talking about my signature, about dating documents before the accident, about 5 more days, something inside me sharpened. The confusion burned off. What replaced it wasn't panic. It was clarity. This wasn't about helping me manage paperwork while I recovered. This was about transferring ownership of my share of my grandmother's house, equally left to both of us. Equal had never sat well with Melissa. 2 years earlier, when the will was read, she had smiled in that polished way she'd perfected since childhood, warm, gracious, grateful. But I noticed the tension in her jaw, the slight stiffness in her posture when the lawyer repeated the word equal. At the time, I thought it was just grief mixing with logistics. Now I understood it differently, because over the last year, she had been asking quiet questions. What are you going to do with your half? Would you ever consider selling? It might be easier if one of us just handled everything. She always framed it as convenience, as family unity, as practicality. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Melissa had made a series of reckless decisions that were finally catching up to her. 2 years ago, she borrowed $80,000 for a man who promised to leave his wife and build a life with her. He disappeared with the money. No forwarding address, no apology, no repayment. She never told our parents the truth. She couldn't. Her image was too carefully maintained. She was still the miracle child, the fragile one, the one who deserved protection. Admitting she had been manipulated would fracture that image. So instead, she started calculating. And when I was trapped in a hospital bed, unable to move or speak, she saw what she thought was an answer. My mother's words echoed in my mind. She can't object to anything right now. Object, not discuss. Not consent, object. That meant they knew I would say no. The next afternoon, my mother visited alone. She paced near the window while speaking on the phone, unaware or unconcerned that I could hear every word. Yes, I have samples, she said. Birthday cards, checks. It's consistent enough. A pause. The notary understands. We just need the date to reflect before the accident. Another pause. She's expected to recover in 5 to 7 days. We don't have long. Her tone wasn't frantic. It was controlled, measured, like she was finalizing a business transaction. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't emotional desperation. This was logistical planning. When she ended the call, she finally looked at me. For a split second, I thought I saw hesitation, maybe even guilt, but it passed. You need to rest, she said gently, as if I were the child. She left without touching my hand. That was when the rage came. Not loud. Not explosive. Quiet. Steady. For 35 years, I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was the responsible choice. That absorbing tension, instead of creating it, made me the stronger one. But lying there, listening to my own mother coordinate a forgery while I was paralyzed, I realized something devastating. My silence had trained them to believe I would never resist. And now they were counting on it. Melissa visited later that evening. She sat down, crossed her legs, and looked around the room as if evaluating it. You look better, she said. I stared at her. You know, she continued casually, this might actually simplify things. You've always been so busy. Managing the house would have just stressed you out. There it was again, the narrative of convenience. I'll handle it, she said. Mom agrees. It's better this way. Better. For whom? I tried to force sound out of my throat. Nothing came but a strained whisper that didn't reach her ears. She leaned closer. You don't need to worry about paperwork, she said softly. We'll take care of everything. We. That word used to mean family. Now it meant alliance. Conspiracy. I replayed the staircase memory for the first time in years. 17 years old, Thanksgiving, the argument I barely remembered, the sensation of hands against my back before I fell, the long hospital stay after, the way everyone insisted it was an accident. I had buried that memory because doubting it meant doubting my family. But now the pattern was impossible to ignore. The inheritance wasn't just about property, it was about control. If Melissa controlled the house, she controlled the narrative. She could position herself as the responsible daughter, the caretaker of legacy, the one who stepped up when I was unable. And if I recovered too quickly, if I asked questions, if I challenged the timeline, that's when she unplugged the ventilator. The first time, I wondered if it was intimidation. The second time, when she returned at 2 a.m. with agitation in her movements, I understood it differently. You're healing too fast, she whispered. The doctors are optimistic. Optimistic was not part of their plan. The documents need 5 more days, she said. We can't have you waking up and ruining everything. She reached for the tube again. This time, it wasn't about teaching gratitude. It was about buying time. When she disconnected it, the panic surged through me like electricity. But beneath the fear, something else crystallized. She wasn't just willing to steal from me. She was willing to risk killing me. And that realization changed everything. Because stealing property is one kind of betrayal. But calculating someone's oxygen supply, that's another level entirely. The house had become more than real estate. It was leverage. If I died, everything defaulted to her. If I remained incapacitated long enough, the forged documents would stand uncontested. Either way, she won. Unless I survived long enough to speak. Unless someone believed me. As the ventilator hissed back to life after she reattached it, I stared at the ceiling and felt a strange shift inside myself. For years, I had minimized things. It's not that bad. She doesn't mean it. Family is complicated. But this wasn't complicated. It was deliberate. They thought my body's stillness meant compliance. They thought the accident had reduced me to a passive obstacle. What they didn't realize was that paralysis sharpens perception. When you can't move, you notice everything. And someone else had started noticing too. I didn't know her name yet, but I saw the way the day shift nurse lingered in the doorway. I saw her glance at the monitor when Melissa entered the room. I saw her eyes narrow just slightly. For the first time since the accident, I felt something flicker that wasn't fear. Possibility, because inheritance plans can be drafted. Signatures can be forged. But patterns leave traces. And if there was one thing I understood better than anyone in that room, it was patterns. They thought they were managing risk. They forgot I built my career on detecting it. And if I lived long enough to move my fingers, even just one, their plan wasn't going to unfold the way they expected. Her name was Rachel Morrison. And I noticed her because she was the first person in that hospital who didn't treat me like a piece of furniture. She was on the day shift, mid-40s, maybe a little older. Short hair streaked with gray, sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She moved with quiet efficiency, but unlike the others, she didn't rush through my room like it was just another stop on a long list. When she checked my vitals, she looked at me. Not through me, at me. The first time she lingered, Melissa was sitting beside my bed, speaking in that soft, polished voice she used in public. "She looks so peaceful, doesn't she?" my sister said. My heart rate spiked instantly. Not intentionally, at least not at first. Fear has its own rhythm. The monitor began to beep faster, sharper. Rachel glanced at the screen, then at Melissa, then at me. Her heart rate jumped suddenly, Rachel said calmly. "Oh," Melissa replied lightly. "She always gets anxious. She's dramatic like that." Dramatic? Even paralyzed? That word followed me. Rachel adjusted something on the IV stand, but didn't leave. She watched a little longer than necessary. When Melissa finally stood and walked out, my heart rate began to slow. Rachel noticed that too. Over the next 2 days, I began to test something. Every time Melissa entered the room, I focused on the fear. I let it rise instead of suppressing it. My pulse would climb, the monitor would record it. When she left, I forced myself to think of numbers calm, steady numbers, and my heart would settle. It was the only signal I had left, and Rachel was paying attention. On the 3rd day, she closed the door halfway behind her and stepped closer to my bed. "Danielle," she said softly, making sure we were alone, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer the only way you can." She leaned in so our eyes were level. "Are you afraid of your sister?" I blinked twice. "Yes." She paused. I saw the shift in her expression, not surprise, but confirmation. "Is something happening when she visits you?" 2 blinks again. Rachel inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Do you want my help?" I blinked twice as fast as I could manage. That was the first moment since the accident that I felt something other than fear. I felt believed. Rachel didn't react dramatically. She didn't storm out or confront anyone. She did something much more powerful. She documented. She began pulling visitor logs quietly. Cross-referencing times, Melissa entered my room with spikes in my heart rate and oxygen irregularities noted by the night staff. She reviewed monitor data more closely than anyone else had bothered to. One afternoon, while my mother stood in the hallway speaking on her phone again, Rachel lingered within earshot. "How much longer until the notary finishes?" my mother whispered. "We're running out of time." Rachel's eyes flicked toward me. Running out of time. That night, after her shift officially ended, she came back in wearing her jacket instead of scrubs. She locked the door gently behind her. "I believe you," she said quietly. The words nearly broke me. "But belief isn't enough," she continued. "We need proof." She pulled a chair closer. "This state is a one-party consent state," she said carefully. "That means if one person involved in a conversation consents to being recorded, it's legal. You're aware. You're consenting." Anything captured is admissible. I blinked twice. Yes, she interpreted softly. Do you want me to place a recording device in this room? 2 blinks. Yes. She nodded once. Okay, then we do this carefully. That night, when the hallway quieted and security rounds passed, Rachel returned with something small and unremarkable, a compact recording device. She tucked it behind the monitor stand, out of casual sight but close enough to capture voices near my bed. Next time, she whispered, we'll have evidence. But Rachel didn't stop there. While my family believed they were controlling the narrative inside the hospital room, she was investigating outside it. She searched public records during her breaks. She called in favors from a friend in administrative services. She requested archived incident reports connected to our family name. 3 days later, she walked into my room looking different. Not afraid, angry. I found something, she said quietly. She pulled a printed report from her folder and held it where I could see the header. 18 years ago. Police report, filed by a woman named Margaret, my mother's sister. The report described a teenage girl pushing her older sister down a flight of stairs. The victim hospitalized for 3 weeks. The case dismissed due to lack of evidence. The reporting witness cut off from the family. My chest tightened. I had told myself that fall was an accident. I had replayed it in my mind over the years, the slip, the imbalance, the shock. But in my dreams, there were always hands. Rachel looked at me gently. The teenage girl named in this report was Melissa, she said. The victim was you. For 18 years, I had buried that memory because acknowledging it would have shattered the version of my family I clung to. Now there was paper, documentation, proof that someone else had seen what I felt. She never dropped it, Rachel continued. Your aunt kept everything. Photos, statements. She believed the truth would surface one day. Tears slid down the sides of my face. I couldn't lift a hand to wipe them away. I think your sister learned something that day, Rachel said quietly. She learned she could get away with it. The pattern locked into place. The stairs. The inheritance. The ventilator. This wasn't escalation born from sudden desperation. It was rehearsal repeated with higher stakes. By the 6th day in the hospital, I could move my fingers slightly, barely, but enough. My voice came back in fragments, strained whispers that scraped against my throat. Rachel visited before her shift started. I found your aunt, she said. She's been living in Arizona. When I told her what was happening, she cried. She paused. She said she's been waiting 18 years for someone to believe her. 18 years. She had kept the evidence in a safe deposit box. The police report, her written statement, photographs of my injuries after the fall. She never threw them away because she believed the truth would matter eventually. I had spent my entire life trying not to cause disruption. And somewhere out there, my aunt had been holding on to proof that I deserved justice. Rachel leaned closer. We're building a case, she said. Visitor logs, monitor data, your mother's hallway conversations. If your sister talks again, really talks, the recorder will capture it. I swallowed carefully. We need a pattern, she added. Not just one incident. I understood. 1 unplugged ventilator could be explained away. 2? Combined with a prior violent report? That was something else. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't just surviving. I was strategizing. I had spent my childhood shrinking to avoid conflict. Now I would do the opposite. I would let her speak. And this time, she wouldn't realize she was walking into a trap. Because the thing about people who believe they're untouchable is this. They get careless when they think you can't fight back. And Melissa still believed I was helpless. She didn't know that every word she said from this moment forward might be the one that finally saved my life. By the 6th day, I could move 2 fingers on my right hand. It wasn't much, just a faint twitch at first, like my body was remembering how to belong to me again. But in that hospital room, it felt like a revolution. My voice followed slowly, not strong, not steady, but present. A thin, rasping whisper that scraped against my throat. The doctors were encouraged. They called it promising, faster than expected. They had no idea how dangerous that word was to my sister. Promising meant time was running out. Rachel had already placed the recorder behind the monitor. Visitor logs were being copied. Oxygen fluctuations were documented. My Aunt Margaret was flying in with 18 years of buried evidence. All we needed now was something undeniable. A confession. And for that, I needed Melissa to feel safe. She came that afternoon with her usual composure. Hair perfectly styled, makeup subtle, the concerned younger sister costume she'd worn her entire life. "The doctors say you're improving," she said, pulling the chair closer to my bed. "That's wonderful. Mom's been praying nonstop." I watched her carefully. This was the first time she'd heard my voice since before the accident. I waited until she glanced down at her phone, distracted, comfortable. "I've been dreaming," I whispered. Her eyes snapped up. It was the first crack in her mask. "Dreaming?" she repeated lightly. "About the stairs," I said. Silence. It wasn't dramatic. No music, no thunderclap moment, just a stillness so heavy it felt like the air had thickened. Her posture changed almost imperceptibly. "What about them?" she asked. I kept my tone weak, vulnerable. "I remember hands," I said. "On my back, before I fell. I saw it then, not guilt, not fear, recognition. For a split second, she looked like someone who had just been caught in a lie she thought was safely buried. Then she did something I will never forget. She laughed, softly. "You remember?" she said. There was no warmth in her voice. After 18 years of denial, of pretending, she didn't try to gaslight me. She didn't even hesitate. "Yes," she said finally. "I pushed you." The words hung in the air between us, shockingly simple. "I was 15, she continued, "and I was tired. Tired of everyone asking about you for once. Poor Danielle in the hospital. Poor Danielle who needed 3 weeks to recover." She stood up and walked toward the window, her back to me. "For once," she said, "I wanted them to forget you existed." My heart was pounding, but this time not from fear. The recorder was running. "You didn't die," she said, turning back toward me. Her face was stripped of performance now, raw, bitter. "You never die. That's your only talent, Danielle, surviving when you should have disappeared." The cruelty of it was almost abstract, like she wasn't even talking about a person, like I was an inconvenience that kept failing to remove itself. "Mom and Dad spent weeks fussing over you," she continued, "and I had to smile and pretend I cared. Do you know what that felt like? Being invisible in my own family because you wouldn't stay out of the way? Invisible. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so horrifying. I had spent my entire life shrinking to avoid overshadowing her. And in her version of reality, I was the one stealing attention. The recorder captured every word. "That was 18 years ago," she said finally, smoothing her expression. "No one will believe you. No one ever does." She picked up her purse. "Get some rest," she added sweetly. The door closed behind her. Rachel slipped in through the side entrance moments later. "I heard enough from the hallway," she whispered. The recorder got the rest. I exhaled shakily. But we weren't done, because Melissa wasn't finished with her plan. 2 nights later, at 2:07 a.m., she returned. I heard her before I saw her faster steps, less composed, agitated. Something had gone wrong. The notary was nervous. The timeline slipping. My recovery accelerating. She stood over my bed, and this time there was no pretense. "You're healing too fast," she said bluntly. "They're talking about you speaking normally by the end of the week." I didn't respond. "The documents need 5 more days," she said. "We can't have you asking questions." She reached for the ventilator tube. My body reacted before my mind could fully process it. "No," I tried to whisper, but it came out fractured. She leaned close. "So let's slow things down." She disconnected it. Air vanished again. The panic was just as violent as the first time, but something inside me was different now. I wasn't just afraid. I was furious. She stood there watching, counting seconds in her head like she was calculating interest on a loan. And then the door burst open. Rachel. She froze in the doorway for half a heartbeat, taking in the scene, the disconnected tube, the alarm screaming, Melissa's hand still hovering too close to my face. Melissa reattached it instantly. "It was loose," she said quickly. "I was helping." Rachel didn't argue. She walked to my bedside calmly, checked the connection, checked my vitals, then looked directly at Melissa. "I'm going to have to report this," she said evenly. "Hospital protocol." Melissa's composure cracked. "You're overreacting," she snapped. "I'm the only one here who actually cares about her." Rachel didn't respond to the accusation. She pressed the call button for security. Melissa was escorted out, still insisting she had done nothing wrong. When the room was quiet again, Rachel leaned close to me. "This is attempted murder," she said softly. Hearing someone else say it made it real in a way my fear alone never had. Not family drama. Not sibling rivalry. Attempted murder. The recorder had captured her earlier confession. The visitor logs showed her late-night entry. The monitor data showed oxygen interference. And now there was a witness, Rachel. She had seen Melissa disconnect it. Later that morning, as dawn filtered through the hospital blinds, Rachel brought me something else. "Your aunt is landing this afternoon," she said. "She's bringing the safe deposit box contents. The staircase. The fall. The first attempt. Everything was converging." I lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing something profound. For 35 years, I had been conditioned to minimize myself to preserve peace, but peace had never protected me. Silence had never saved me. Survival had always been something I did alone. Now, for the first time, I wasn't alone. The recorder held her voice. The nurse had witnessed her hand. My aunt carried 18 years of proof. Melissa believed no one would ever believe me. She was wrong. And this time, when she said, "I never die," she wasn't insulting me. She was predicting her own undoing. Because surviving wasn't my only talent. Remembering was. And now the truth had finally found someone willing to listen. The moment Rachel said the words, "attempted murder," something inside me settled. Not because it made me feel safe, but because it finally named what had been happening. For years, I had lived inside ambiguity, minimizing, rationalizing, explaining away things that didn't feel right. The staircase, the favoritism, the quiet manipulation around the inheritance. Even the first time Melissa unplugged the ventilator, part of me had searched for an excuse. There are no excuses for cutting off someone's air. By morning, the hospital administration had been notified. Security filed an internal incident report, but Rachel didn't let it stop there. "We're calling the police," she told me. Not hospital security, not family mediation. The police? 2 detectives arrived that afternoon, a man in his early 40s with a calm, unreadable expression, and a younger woman who took notes with focused precision. They listened without interrupting while Rachel explained what she had witnessed. She handed them copies of visitor logs. The monitor data showing oxygen disruption during Melissa's visits. The recording device. Then they turned to me. My voice was still fragile, but it held. "My sister confessed," I said, "about pushing me down the stairs when I was 17, and about disconnecting the ventilator to delay my recovery." The older detective didn't react outwardly, but I saw something shift in his posture. "Do you have proof of the confession?" he asked. Rachel pressed play. Melissa's voice filled the room unmistakable. "Yes, I pushed you." There was no misunderstanding it, no ambiguity, just clarity, raw and unfiltered. The younger detective paused the recording halfway through. "This changes things," she said quietly. "They requested a warrant for my mother's phone before sunset. When they returned that evening, they had it. My mother didn't cry when they confiscated her phone in the hospital hallway. She didn't argue. She simply stiffened, chin raised, as if she were being inconvenienced rather than investigated. "This is absurd," she said sharply. "My daughters are under stress." The detectives didn't respond. Within 24 hours, everything unraveled. 2 years of text messages were recovered. Conversations between my mother and Melissa about the inheritance, about timing, about waiting for the right opportunity, about finding a notary willing to replicate my signature. One message, sent 18 months before my accident, read, "Don't worry, sweetheart. When the time is right, Danielle's share will be yours." Another, 3 months before the crash. "I need it to look authentic. Use her birthday card as a reference." and the one sent the night of my accident, only hours after I was admitted. This is our chance. She can't fight back. Start the paperwork. Reading those words felt like falling through ice. This wasn't desperation born from sudden panic. This was planning, calculated, strategic. Years in the making. The detectives expanded the investigation quickly. The notary's office was searched. Drafted transfer documents were seized. The forged signature compared to my real one. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to be dangerous. Then my Aunt Margaret arrived. I hadn't seen her in 18 years. She looked older, of course silver threading through her hair, lines etched around her eyes. But when she stepped into my hospital room, I recognized her immediately. She was the aunt who used to bring me books when I was sick. The aunt who remembered my favorite cake. The aunt who disappeared after my fall. She held a small metal box in her hands like it contained something sacred. I never threw it away, she said softly. Inside were copies of the police report she filed the night she saw Melissa push me down the stairs. Photographs of my injuries. Her written statement describing the exact moment she witnessed it. I told your mother, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I expected her to be horrified. Instead, she told me if I ever spoke of it again, I was dead to this family. She had been cut off the next day. No visits, no calls. For 18 years, she had kept the evidence in a safe deposit box, waiting for someone to believe her. I knew one day it would matter, she whispered. Hearing that was like breathing clean air after years underground. Because for so long, I had questioned my own memory. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe I imagined the hands. But Margaret had seen it, and she never doubted it. The staircase wasn't an isolated moment. It was the beginning of a pattern. The detectives connected everything: the prior assault, the inheritance motive, the forged documents, the ventilator incident, the confession. By the end of the week, Melissa was arrested. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery. My mother was charged as a co-conspirator. Watching them take Melissa away was surreal. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked at me once, not with hatred, but disbelief. As if she couldn't understand how the story had shifted. As if she still believed I would fold. But I didn't. Recovery accelerated after that. Maybe it was the stress lifting. Maybe it was adrenaline. Within days, I could sit up. Within weeks, I could stand with assistance. The physical healing felt almost secondary to what was happening legally. Every new piece of evidence reinforced what I had finally allowed myself to see. This wasn't sibling rivalry. It wasn't emotional volatility. It was a sustained effort to remove me. The detectives later told me something that still chills me. The accident itself, the drunk driver, was unrelated. They found no evidence of coordination there. But the timing? Melissa had seen it as opportunity. My paralysis wasn't part of the plan. It was a gift, and she almost used it to finish what she started 18 years earlier. As the investigation moved toward prosecution, I found myself sitting alone in my hospital room one evening, looking at my hands. They trembled slightly when I flexed them. Alive, responsive, mine. I thought about all the times I had stepped aside growing up. All the times I apologized to keep the peace. All the times I convinced myself that survival was enough. Survival is not enough when someone is trying to erase you. Justice doesn't erase the past. It doesn't undo the stairs. It doesn't take back the 30 seconds without air. But it does something equally important. It confirms that what happened was real, that you weren't dramatic, that you weren't imagining it, that your silence was never consent. The investigation stretched over 3 months. Charges formalized, court dates set. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking. I was preparing to testify. And as I practiced speaking clearly again, strengthening my voice, I realized something almost ironic. Melissa had always believed I survived by accident. She was wrong. I survived because I learned to observe, to endure, to wait. And this time, I wasn't waiting to disappear. I was waiting to speak. By the time the trial began, I could walk without assistance. 3 months earlier, I had been trapped inside a body that wouldn't respond, listening to machines breathe for me, while my sister calculated how long I could survive without air. Now I stood outside a courtroom in low heels, palms slightly damp, waiting to tell the truth out loud. Recovery had been physical, yes, but the deeper recovery was something else, reclaiming my voice. The courtroom was fuller than I expected. Local news had picked up the story. Prominent family, attempted murder, forged inheritance documents, an 18-year cover-up. People are drawn to stories about betrayal inside families, maybe because they hit too close to home. I sat behind the prosecution table, not as a victim in a hospital bed, but as a witness. Melissa sat across the room, her hair pulled back neatly, expression composed. If someone walked in without context, they might think she was there for a financial dispute. My mother sat beside her. She didn't look at me. The prosecutor began with the timeline: the car accident, the hospitalization, the ventilator, the forged documents, the staircase 18 years earlier. Each event alone could be debated. Together, they formed a pattern. The first major piece of evidence presented was the text message thread recovered from my mother's phone. The prosecutor read them slowly. "Don't worry, sweetheart. When the time is right, Danielle's share will be yours. I need the signature to look authentic. Use her birthday card as reference. This is our chance. She can't fight back." Hearing those words spoken in a courtroom was different than reading them in a police report. They carried weight. They echoed off wood-paneled walls. My mother's attorney stood quickly. "These messages are taken out of context," he argued. This was estate planning, concern over legal logistics. But context is hard to manipulate when timing is precise. The message sent hours after my accident wasn't about estate planning. It was about opportunity. Then the recording was played. Melissa's voice filled the courtroom. "Yes, I pushed you." A quiet murmur rippled through the gallery. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The confession about the staircase established history, but the ventilator established intent. That was where Rachel came in. She walked to the witness stand with the calm steadiness I remembered from the hospital room. She described what she observed: the heart rate spikes, the oxygen irregularities, the late-night visit. "And what did you see on the night in question?" the prosecutor asked. Rachel didn't hesitate. "I saw her disconnect the ventilator." 6 words: clear, measured, final. The defense attempted to suggest misinterpretation, equipment malfunction, overworked staff confusion. Rachel remained unshaken. "The alarms were triggered by manual disconnection," she said. "I saw her hand on the tube. Then it was my turn. I stood, walked to the stand, and raised my right hand to swear in. The same hand that had once barely twitched under hospital sheets. The prosecutor guided me through it gently. My childhood, the staircase, the accident, the hallway conversations, the whisper, 'You're finally useful.' When I described the moment the ventilator went silent, the courtroom felt very still. 'What did you feel?' the prosecutor asked. 'Air leaving,' I said quietly, 'and her watching.' The defense attorney approached for cross-examination. 'Miss Carter, you admit you were under extreme stress. Is it possible you misinterpreted your sister's actions?' 'No,' I said. 'Is it possible you're projecting past sibling tensions onto an unfortunate medical incident, Propra?' 'No.' 'What makes you so certain?' I met his eyes. She did it twice. There are moments when truth doesn't need embellishment. It just needs to be stated plainly. The final turning point came when my Aunt Margaret testified. She described seeing 15-year-old Melissa place both hands on my back. She described my mother's response. 'If you ever speak of this again, you're dead to this family.' The courtroom shifted. This wasn't a spontaneous act fueled by temporary panic. This was a pattern protected for nearly 2 decades. The defense tried one last angle. Melissa's lawyer portrayed her as psychologically fragile, pressured by childhood illness, damaged by family expectations. He suggested therapy would be more appropriate than prison. Then the prosecutor displayed financial records, the $80,000 loan, the transfer history, the timeline aligning perfectly with her sudden interest in the inheritance. Desperation wasn't random. It had a dollar amount. When Melissa was finally called to the stand in her own defense, she maintained composure at first. I was trying to help, she said regarding the ventilator. It looked loose. And the confession? The prosecutor asked. I was emotional, she replied. My sister was provoking me. Provoking. From a hospital bed. Unable to move. That word landed poorly. Then came the final piece. The monitor data correlated with visitor logs, showing oxygen disruptions precisely during her visits and normal readings otherwise. Numbers don't dramatize. They testify. Closing arguments were brief. The prosecution framed it simply: motive, opportunity, prior act, confession, witness. The defense framed it as misunderstanding, mental strain, family conflict. The jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned, the room felt compressed. The foreperson stood. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. On the charge of forgery, guilty. My mother was found guilty of conspiracy and fraud. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I felt something far quieter. Release. For 35 years, I had been told I was dramatic when I questioned what felt wrong. I had been told to be patient, to understand, to forgive. But forgiveness without accountability is just permission. As Melissa was led away, she looked at me again. Not with disbelief this time, with something closer to emptiness. I don't know what she expected, that I would withdraw the charges, that I would protect her reputation the way I had protected her comfort for years. I didn't, because surviving someone isn't the same as saving them. After the courtroom emptied, I stepped outside into sunlight that felt almost unreal. Reporters called my name. Cameras flashed. I didn't answer questions about revenge. This wasn't revenge. It was boundaries enforced by law. It was truth documented. It was oxygen restored. People often ask if I feel victorious. The honest answer is no. I feel clear. Clear about what happened. Clear about who I am. Clear about what I will never tolerate again. Surviving isn't dramatic. It isn't loud. It's stubborn. And if there's one thing my sister was right about, it's this: I don't disappear. But now, I don't stay silent either. And that, more than any verdict, is what finally set me free. When I look back on everything that happened, I don't see just a story about a ventilator, a courtroom, or even a sister's betrayal. I see a story about silence, how it's taught, how it's rewarded, and how dangerous it becomes when it protects the wrong people. This wasn't only about inheritance or greed. It was about what happens when someone grows up believing they can never be questioned and someone else grows up believing they should never speak. If this story resonated with you, it may be because you felt that imbalance too, in your family, your relationships, or your own past. Maybe you've been called dramatic for telling the truth. Maybe you've survived something quietly, without applause, without validation. If so, I hope this story reminded you of something important. Survival is strength, and your voice matters. Thank you for listening all the way through. Stories like this deserve to be told carefully, honestly, and without fear. If you believe that truth always finds its way to the surface, subscribe to Hanji Wi Ye Iyagi. Here, we share stories written on fragile paper but carried by unbreakable voices. And sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that change everything.